The president said Tuesday will be the day of the power plant and the day of the bridge in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the Strait of Hormuz, he said, postponing the deadline to 8 p.m. on Tuesday Eastern Time. This is now the ultimatum for Iran. Let's now join FTD research analyst Ahmad Sharawi. Thank you very much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. And it seems that we are on the verge of an escalation once again with these new threats from President Trump. What does this signal to you?
First of all, thank you for having me. President Trump extended the deadline last week to April 6th for Iran to negotiate and open the Strait of Hormuz. So far, we have no indication that the Iranians are planning to do so. All reports are indicating. I think Iran is refusing to negotiate and is imposing harsh conditions that the United States would never accept for reopening this strait. Thank you, Ivan. I think that's why President Trump is reinforcing the threat to attack power plants in Iran. But the next 24 hours will be crucial. As we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, usually President Trump starts on Monday and says that negotiations are going well or that negotiations are happening at the moment. We're all keeping an eye on Monday morning to see the status of the negotiations and if something can actually happen between the United States and Iran. Thank you.
Yes, of course, he says he's optimistic about concluding the deal, but he set this deadline. As you mentioned, the two sides remain far apart and there is no convergence on the demands of the United States. However, just like in the case of Iran, have we seen them come together in any way? Is there any common ground between them?
Again, I think the Iranians are refusing to negotiate and are planning to continue their relentless attacks against civilian infrastructure in the Gulf, against United States bases. So there's no indication that the Iranians are, at the moment, willing to sit down. Apparently, even these mediators, Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt, tried to extend the deadline that President Trump set. But again, there's no indication that the Iranians are willing to give in to the demands the United States is making, especially regarding the Strait of Hormuz.
And in terms of the Strait of Hormuz, that choke point is absolutely vital. Trump told NATO allies that it's not important and then that they need to pay, using a swear word. Open the Strait of Hormuz or will there be real chaos? How much pressure is there on President Trump and foreign actors to reopen the strait?
Well, I believe that the global impact of closing the strait has in fact been quite evident. Oil prices have risen significantly, and with the markets opening in the next few hours, we will better understand the real impact of this weekend's events and how this might affect President Trump's decision-making. If oil prices remain high, then we might see an escalation or a greater push toward diplomacy. But again, it all depends on oil market prices, and especially because of the amount of oil transported through the Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf states are impacted. But in Ziwa it's different. We have a capable domestic industry, however, the global economy is interconnected. So the impacts are felt all over the world.
If that deadline passes on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time and the United States actually attacks Iran's infrastructure and critical oil sites, what will their response be? Will they attack other Arab states as they have done before?
Yes. The desalination plants in the Gulf states would be in the sites of the Islamic Republic, the oil infrastructure, and along the Gulf would also be heavily targeted. But, let me point out that these states have already been extensively targeted by Iran over the past 5 weeks. We saw several attacks yesterday targeting oil infrastructure and water desalination plants in Kuwait. But I would assume that if Iran is attacked, then we will see an increase in these attacks against those Gulf states. So instead of just one facility being targeted, we might see more drones and missiles aiming at those facilities. And it's worth noting that desalination plants in Kuwait and Bahrain are vital for the survival of those states, since they don't have storage reserves to sustain them. If those facilities are attacked, we could face a humanitarian catastrophe.
Yes, and obviously so many people are impacted in regions that end up getting caught in this tangle, but that's exactly the point I wanted to get to. Which countries will depend on the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, which are affected by this? How could this impact their relationship with the United States?
The United States has been straightforward with them. We saw how the country played a crucial role in interception and how its air defenses were fundamental in preventing many of those attacks from reaching their targets. Missiles and drones hit critical facilities. We saw partners like Ukraine supporting these Gulf states to prevent attacks on their territories. Thus, the Israelis and others have played an important role in the defense of these countries. And I think some of them understand the need for the fight that the US is waging. They need to understand the lethality of this regime and how ruthless it is, willing to attack civilian infrastructure to cause as much damage as possible.
Tomorrow we will enter the 6th week of this conflict, and this is exactly within the window that was mentioned by President Trump and the White House. In your opinion, does this timeline continue beyond these 6 weeks, and what does that mean to you?
I think President Trump made it clear in his speech on Wednesday that there are 2 to 3 weeks left for targeting what still needs to be hit. I think the timeline also depends on changes on the battlefield. Since the beginning of the operation, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. So, I think that as long as the ECOWAS are targeting military infrastructure and facilities that enable Iran's war capabilities, then maybe we can consider that timeline President Trump mentioned on Wednesday. But of course, if things change and there is new intelligence about other missile cities or infrastructure that hadn't been found before, then that could be extended. But again, all of this depends on what is actually happening on the battlefield.
And a lot also depends on the capabilities of the Iranian armed forces. We've just seen in the last few days the Iranians hit an F-15 fighter jet. The United States carried out a life or death rescue operation in the mountains of Iran to recover them or to repatriate them. Does that mean anything? Does it worry you in any way that Iran is showing its capabilities like this and the fact that they could close the Strait of Hormuz? Was the U.S. somewhat surprised by these capabilities? If so, what do you make of that?
Well, there have already been several reports about how many ballistic missiles and launchers Iran has. We saw that at the beginning of the war the number was quite different, but the decoy tests significantly degraded Iran's ability to launch many missiles at once. But I think we still don't have, at least those of us watching from the outside who don't have access to intelligence, we see a decrease in these attacks. But Iran still has the capability to launch drone and missile attacks. And that's why it's necessary for the US to continue with this to basically degrade their ability to wage war.
And going back to the Strait of Hormuz, why did the Iranians basically put up a stop sign at this choke point? Is this the new normal for this region? How likely is it they'll bring Bab al-Mandeb into this as well, along with the Houthis? Are you monitoring that as well?
For sure, the Bab al-Mandeb remains a critical point, and if it is closed, we will be facing a major crisis. I think the Houthis have focused their attacks on Israel probably to avoid retaliation unless a missile hits Israel. So far, there have been 4 or 5 attacks claimed by the Houthis. All of them were intercepted. I think the Houthis strategically understand that closing the Bab al-Mandeb or attacking ships in the Red Sea would escalate the war, and it would cause an escalation that would drag the Ziwa into the conflict. I don't think they want to do that right now. For now, the Houthis are signaling that they could close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait and that they are still present there. But I think moving in that direction would mean a massive escalation by the Ziwa or Israel.
And that day of the bridge and the plant that President Trump threatened would be the push the Houthis need to enter the conflict. Then,
there's always the possibility of the Houthis attacking oil facilities and energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf in retaliation. But again, I think that in terms of their decision-making process, attacking the Gulf states would mean expanding the war, in which case the Saudis or the Emiratis might have to retaliate. So for now, I think the Houthis are focusing their attacks against Israel because they understand that attacking energy facilities in the Gulf states could mean a greater escalation of the war, a risk they might not want to take at this moment.
Regarding Israel, they collaborated at the beginning of this operation, Epic Fury, or Roaring Lion as they called their operation. They also disrupted some attacks in the search and rescue area. Israel remains aligned with the United States on the objectives set in these negotiations and potentially in the face of threats beyond that.
Israel understands that weakening this regime and its military capabilities is essential for its security. There is a clear alignment between Israel and the United States on this, but Israel also faces the threat of Iran's proxies, such as Hezbollah, which attacks the north of the country daily, as well as the threat from the Houthis. So, in terms of priorities, we see that the Iwaya are not targeting these proxies in Lebanon or the Houthis. At the moment, Israel is also watching and dealing with this front at the same time. But, in the overall objectives of the war, to weaken the Iranian regime and ensure that it cannot act again. As for the military power to target American interests, Israel and neighboring states, the cowards and Israel are fully aligned in their objectives.
Yes, and Iran has also said that it never wants to be attacked again. This is part of the negotiation, it's one of their demands. But if a negotiation is taking place, if President Trump wants diplomacy, is that something Israel fully agrees with?
I think that overall Israel understands that President Trump, or at least that there has been, in terms of war objectives, a severe degradation of military capabilities, naval power, and air force, which have been the main objectives from the beginning. And I think that with Israel targeting part of the political leadership in Iran, as well as the military leadership, there was a division of tasks regarding the targets. But I think Israel also understands that President Trump has opened the door to negotiations and that he may have to find a negotiating tactic to end this war. But even so, we still see Israeli attacks in collaboration with ZUA in identifying military infrastructure targets, ballistic missiles, and their launchers. Despite the talks about negotiations, there is still complete alignment between Emir Yubar and Israel regarding the goals of weakening the regime. But also, as we saw yesterday, Israel played a key role in rescuing the weapons systems officer who was located in Iranian territory.
Yes, that's a very good point. Ahmad, one last question before I let you go, going back to the beginning. This aggressive threat says 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the day of the bridge or the power plant, and we've seen these ultimatums before. Is it likely and possible that President Trump will postpone this deadline to try diplomacy?
So, as I mentioned earlier, Pakistan, Egypt, and Saudi are maneuvering to extend the deadline, according to Arab reports. I mean, as we've seen, the deadline was supposed to end at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. Now it's at 8 p.m. The question is, would the Iranians ask these mediators to extend it? It all depends on the status of the negotiations at the moment. The diplomats from ZUA are speaking directly with Iran, with their Iranian counterparts. Again, these things are usually done in secret and are normally only revealed afterwards. But I mean, there's always a chance of that extension. It was extended once before. It was supposed to be last week, but it was extended until April 6th. The thing is, in the next few hours, we'll see if it will be extended. 8 p.m. on Tuesday is in 48 hours. So, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate, these mediating states are fully willing to continue their campaign to convince President Trump to extend the current deadline for a longer period. And that's why it's quite likely that we'll see an extension at this point. But again, all of this depends on all these factors coming together.
Yes, Trump moves at his own pace. We'll see the outcome as the deadline approaches hour by hour. As I said, maybe on Monday morning he'll update us on the negotiation. We'll be watching closely. All right? Ahmad, thank you very much for your time here on Live Now.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Great conversation there, analyzing that profanity-laden threat from the president about opening the Strait of Hormuz, or maybe it's the day of the plant and the bridge. And this also comes from Fox News. Trey Inkst, in his report, says that time is running out. President Trump gives a grim warning to Iran while detailing negotiations with correspondent Trey Inkst. If they don't make a quick deal, I'm considering blowing everything up and taking control of the oil. We'll see if it will be a power grab like in Venezuela. We'll see if they extend the deadline. There are a lot of factors at play here.